This story begins on a winter road in Montana, where the snow fell so hard it erased the world. A police officer driving alone through the storm saw something dark on the edge of the road. When he stopped, he discovered a German Shepherd mother trapped in a steel snare, using her broken body to shield her tiny puppy from the freezing wind. What happened next changed 3 lives forever. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from and leave your location in the comments. Because this story is not only about survival, it is about the quiet power of staying when it would be easier to walk away. And the miracle that can happen when one heart chooses compassion over fear. The town of Ravenfall, Montana, was almost erased by winter that night. Snow poured from the sky in relentless sheets, driven sideways by a wind that howled like something alive and angry. The highway that cut through the northern forest lay nearly abandoned, a narrow ribbon of gray swallowed by white. Streetlights flickered along the edge of town, their glow dim and defeated, while beyond them the wilderness waited, ancient and merciless. Officer Caleb Monroe, 39 years old, drove alone through the storm in his patrol cruiser, shoulders squared against the weight of another night shift no one else wanted. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, broad in the chest, but lean in the waist, the kind of build earned from years of disciplined training rather than any concern for appearance. His dark hair was kept short, more from habit than regulation now, and faint silver already threaded his temples. His face bore the quiet marks of fatigue, a strong jaw softened by exhaustion, faint lines at the corners of his eyes carved by too many sleepless nights. Those eyes, steel gray, steady, watchful, had once belonged to a man who expected the world to make sense. Now they belonged to someone who had learned otherwise. Caleb had not always been this quiet. Years earlier, before the accident that took his wife and young son on an icy mountain road, not unlike this one, he had laughed easily, filled rooms with warmth. The loss did not break him loudly. It hollowed him. Since then, he kept his life narrow and predictable. Patrol, paperwork, the small cabin outside town, silence. People in Ravenfall respected him. They also knew better than to ask how he was doing. The storm intensified as he crossed the last streetlight at the edge of town. Pines loomed on either side of the road, their branches sagging under thick snow, forming a corridor of shadow and wind. The cruiser's headlights pushed into the darkness, revealing only what the storm allowed. That was when Caleb saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow thrown wrongly across the road's shoulder, a low, dark shape where there should have been only snowdrift. His foot moved to the brake before his mind fully understood why. The cruiser slowed, tires whispering over ice, coming to a stop in a pocket of unnatural quiet. Caleb remained still for one breath, then another. Training, instinct, and the steady caution of a man who had learned the cost of mistakes guided him as he opened the door. The cold struck him instantly, cutting through his coat and into his bones. Snow bit his face. Wind shoved against his chest. He stepped carefully toward the shape. As he closed the distance, the world seemed to shrink to the beam of his flashlight and the sound of his own breath. The dark shape resolved itself into the form of a large German shepherd, lying on her side in the snow. She was a powerful animal even in collapse, thick sable and black coat, broad chest, muscular shoulders, but the storm had already claimed much of her strength. Ice crusted her fur. Frost clung to her whiskers. One front leg was stretched unnaturally forward, caught in the jaws of a steel trap that had been anchored deep into the frozen earth beside the roots of a pine tree. The trap's teeth had crushed bone and muscle. Blood had soaked into the snow beneath her, now dark and frozen like spilled ink. The dog's head lifted weakly as Caleb approached. Her ears flattened, her lips peeled back, revealing strong teeth. A low growl rolled from her chest, more vibration than sound, fueled not by aggression but by something far more ancient and desperate. Protection. Only then did Caleb see what lay beneath her body. Pressed against her belly, nearly invisible against the white, trembled a tiny German shepherd puppy, no more than 2 or 3 weeks old. Its eyes were not fully open. Its body was scarcely larger than Caleb's glove. It shook violently, its breathing shallow and uneven, seeking warmth that the world was determined to steal. The mother shifted her weight slightly, positioning herself between Caleb and the puppy, even as her injured leg dragged uselessly in the trap. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen fear before. He had seen pain. He had seen courage under fire and surrender in the eyes of men who knew the fight was lost. But this silent defiance of a dying mother refusing to abandon her child, struck him with a force he was not prepared for. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, his palms open. "Easy," he murmured, though the wind nearly swallowed the word. He was not certain whether he was speaking to the dog, the storm, or the part of himself that suddenly remembered what it meant to care. The dog's eyes never left him. They were amber and intelligent, burning with warning. She did not whine. She did not plead. She endured. Caleb examined the trap. Industrial steel, heavy, old, rusted at the joints. It had been driven deep into the ground and chained to a buried anchor near the tree roots. Whoever had set it had intended for something large to die slowly. The puppy whimpered, a faint, fragile sound that slipped straight past Caleb's defenses. He swallowed hard. Leaving was not an option. He knew that the same way he knew the storm would not stop for them. The rational voice in his mind tried to argue that nature was cruel, that he could call for help, that he had done his duty by stopping. But another voice, older and stronger, refused to listen. It reminded him of promises once made in places far more dangerous than this. It reminded him of a night when he had stood in falling snow beside a wrecked car, holding his son's small hand as the world went silent. Not again. He returned to the cruiser, his boots sinking deep with each step, and pulled out every tool he had: a compact crowbar, a heavy-duty multi-tool, a tire jack. He returned to the dog, moving slowly, speaking softly, trying to keep his voice calm though his pulse thundered in his ears. The dog snapped once when he drew too close, teeth flashing inches from his hand. Caleb jerked back. Snow sprayed as the dog struggled, the trap biting deeper. Her growl rose, sharp with pain and warning. "I'm not here to hurt you," Caleb said. "I promise." He slid his jacket off and tossed it gently toward her head, using the thick fabric as a barrier while he positioned the crowbar against the trap's joint. The metal resisted. He strained. The bar slipped. He nearly lost his footing. The storm raged on, indifferent. He worked carefully, methodically, his fingers numbing, breath fogging the air. Each time he applied pressure, the dog tensed, growling, muscles trembling. Blood seeped beneath the trap's jaws, staining the snow anew. Minutes passed. 10. 15. The wind pushed harder. Snow piled against his knees. Finally, with a sharp metallic scream, something gave. The anchor bolt tore loose from the frozen ground. The chain went slack. The trap still crushed her leg, but she was no longer bound to the earth. The dog collapsed fully now, sides heaving. Her growl faded into a low, broken sound. Exhaustion and blood loss were taking their toll. Caleb moved quickly. He wrapped his jacket around both mother and puppy, sealing what warmth he could. He leaned close and whispered, his voice shaking despite his effort to keep it steady. "Stay. Please. Just stay." The puppy's tiny body twitched beneath the fabric. Caleb exhaled slowly, his breath trembling in the storm. Somewhere deep inside him, beneath years of loss and guarded silence, something old and fragile stirred. He did not yet know what this night would take from him, or what it would return. But he knew one thing with unshakable certainty. None of them would leave this storm unchanged. The storm did not ease. If anything, the night seemed to tighten its grip on Ravenfall's northern ridge, as though the mountain itself had decided to test every living thing caught upon its skin. Snow fell in heavy sheets, the wind howling through the forest with a voice that sounded almost deliberate, almost knowing. Officer Caleb Monroe stood beside the wounded German shepherd and her trembling puppy, his breath turning to frost in the beam of his flashlight. The dog's amber eyes never left him. They burned with warning and something deeper. An intelligence sharpened by pain, sharpened by responsibility. She was not a stray. Even in collapse, her posture carried the discipline of a working animal. Shoulders squared, head lifted when she could manage it. teeth bared, not in panic but in calculated defense. Caleb moved carefully, slow as snowfall, lowering himself to one knee several feet away. "I'm not here to take your baby," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the cold. "I'm here to get you out of this." The dog answered with a low growl that vibrated through her chest. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from blood loss and the creeping numbness of the cold. Beneath her belly, the puppy twitched and whimpered again, the sound thin and fragile, like paper tearing. Caleb's jaw tightened. The trap was worse than he had first realized. Thick industrial steel. Old. The jaws were sunk deep into the flesh of her front leg, crushing bone and sinew. The chain ran into the earth beside the tree's roots, bolted so firmly into the frozen ground that it might as well have been welded to the mountain itself. Whoever had set it had done so with patience and cruelty. He rose and made his way back to the cruiser, each step sinking into snow that reached halfway up his calves. Inside the trunk he found what he could: a compact crowbar, a heavy-duty multi-tool, a portable tire jack, a flashlight with a cracked lens. Not enough. It would have to be enough. When he returned, the dog's lips peeled back farther, teeth flashing white against the storm. She snapped once at the air, warning him back. Caleb halted immediately, holding both hands up, palms outward, the universal language of peace. "Easy," he said again. I know. He took off his thick patrol jacket and tossed it gently toward her head and shoulders, letting it fall between them as a barrier. The dog lunged weakly, snapping at the fabric, but exhaustion pulled her down again, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The puppy whimpered beneath the jacket's edge. Caleb slid the crowbar into position against the trap's joint, bracing one boot against the snow-packed ground. He pushed. The bar slipped. Metal shrieked. His shoulder jarred, pain flashing down his arm. The dog growled louder now, struggling, the trap biting deeper with every movement. Blood spread beneath her paw, staining the snow a dark, sickening red. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered. "I'm so sorry." He repositioned, hands shaking from cold and effort. He forced the crowbar again. Nothing. Minutes stretched. 10. 15. The storm buried his boots. Ice formed along his eyelashes. The wind clawed at his ears, burning his skin raw. The dog's strength began to fade. Her growl weakened, dissolving into a broken sound that carried more pain than threat. Her eyes flicked once to the puppy, then back to Caleb, as if weighing the world's cruelty against his presence in it. Caleb reached for the tire jack and wedged it beneath the trap's hinge, using the crowbar as leverage. He braced himself, teeth clenched, muscles screaming, old injuries in his shoulder flaring with a familiar ache from years of patrol and a lifetime of carrying things he could not put down. The metal resisted. He pushed harder. Something inside the frozen earth shifted. With a shriek of steel against steel, the buried anchor bolt tore free from the ground. The chain snapped loose. Caleb stumbled backward, falling into the snow, breath ripped from his chest. For a moment, the world spun, the storm roaring in his ears. Then he was back on his feet, rushing to the dog. The trap still crushed her leg, but she was no longer bound to the earth. The dog collapsed fully now, her body shuddering, sides heaving, as shock began to claim its hold. The fight was bleeding out of her, leaving only breath and pain. Caleb moved quickly. He pulled the jacket fully over her head and shoulders, using the thick fabric to shield himself from her teeth. She snapped blindly once, then went still, too weak to continue resisting. He wrapped the jacket around both mother and puppy, sealing what warmth he could. The puppy's tiny body was dangerously cold. Caleb's heart hammered. He scooped the puppy gently and slipped it inside his sweater, pressing it against his bare chest. The shock of cold made him hiss, but the puppy nestled closer instinctively, seeking life. He returned to the dog, braced himself, and with a grunt born of exhaustion and stubborn will, dragged her heavy body through the snow toward the cruiser. She weighed close to 80 pounds, all muscle and bone. By the time he reached the vehicle, his vision swam. His breath came in ragged bursts that burned his lungs. He opened the rear door and, with careful effort, hauled the dog onto the back seat, arranging her as best he could around the trap still clamped to her leg. He covered her with a thermal blanket from the trunk, then climbed into the driver's seat, cradling the puppy beneath his jacket. The engine turned, coughed, died. Silence crashed down heavier than the storm. Caleb rested his forehead against the steering wheel. For a moment, just one, he almost laughed. Of course the night would not be finished with him yet. He checked the puppy. Its breathing was shallow, irregular. He looked back at the tarp-covered form of the mother on the rear seat. Leaving her outside would kill her. Keeping her inside was dangerous. He weighed the risks the way he always had, stacking them neatly in his mind. Then he made the only choice he could live with. He pulled her carefully into the front passenger seat, maneuvering stiff limbs into the cramped space. The cab filled with the smell of wet fur, blood, and cold wilderness. The dog stirred weakly but did not attack. Her eyes met his, still burning, but the edge had dulled. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "We're in this now." Outside, the storm howled without mercy. Inside, 3 wounded lives waited together through the longest night, bound by a decision that could not be undone. The night closed around them like a living thing. Outside the cruiser, the storm battered the mountain road in relentless waves. Snow struck the windshield with a sound like handfuls of gravel. Wind screamed through the trees with a hollow persistence that seemed to gnaw at the bones of the world. Ravenfall might as well have been on the far side of the moon. There would be no passing headlights, no chance voices, no sudden rescues. Not tonight. Inside the vehicle, the air was thick with breath, blood, and the wild scent of the wounded animal pressed into the passenger seat. Caleb Monroe sat rigid behind the wheel, his gloved hands wrapped around nothing, his attention fixed on the slow rise and fall of the German shepherd's chest. Her body lay twisted unnaturally to fit the narrow space. The steel trap still locked around her shattered leg. Each breath she drew was shallow, uneven, a small act of defiance against the cold and the darkness. Her amber eyes never left him. They were not soft. They were not grateful. They were alert, calculating, watching for the slightest mistake. Even broken, even bleeding, she was still dangerous. Caleb knew this. Years of patrol had taught him that pain does not remove instinct. It sharpens it. He shifted carefully in his seat, moving only when he had to, slow and deliberate the way he had once approached unexploded ordnance during joint training exercises. His body remembered those lessons even if his life had long since moved on. Fear often lived in unpredictability. Predictability, especially in suffering, could buy time. Beneath his jacket, pressed against his bare chest, the puppy trembled. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered beneath his palm, frantic and fragile, like a trapped moth. The puppy's skin was dangerously cold. Hypothermia. Caleb had seen it before in men, not animals, but cold did not discriminate. Cold took whatever it was offered. He unzipped his sweater fully and peeled off his thermal undershirt, despite the immediate bite of freezing air against his skin. His body shuddered involuntarily, but he forced himself to breathe through it. He tucked the puppy deeper against his chest, skin to skin, then wrapped the sweater and jacket around both of them, sealing in what little warmth he could. The puppy whimpered weakly, then went still. Caleb's throat tightened. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. He did not know who he was speaking to, the puppy, the mother dog, or the part of himself that had been waiting years to be needed again. "You're not allowed to leave, not tonight." Across the cab, the German shepherd shifted slightly. Her ears twitched. Her eyes followed his movements with fading intensity. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She simply watched, her body trembling violently now, not from aggression but from blood loss and the creeping numbness of shock. Caleb remembered another winter night, years ago, when he had knelt in the snow holding pressure against a wound that would not stop bleeding, his hands shaking despite every drill he had mastered. He remembered the silence that came after. He pushed the memory down. "Not tonight," he whispered again. Time blurred. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm did not relent. Snow piled against the doors. The cold crept through the seams of the vehicle with patient intent, climbing his boots, his spine, his ribs. Caleb rubbed the puppy's tiny body gently, stimulating circulation, counting breaths, counting heartbeats, clinging to each small sign of life. His teeth chattered, his muscles cramped, his eyelids burned. The puppy's breathing grew shallower. Caleb froze. For several seconds, the puppy did not breathe at all. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. He rubbed the puppy more firmly, cupping its tiny ribcage, blowing warm breath against its muzzle. His hands shook violently now, whether from cold or fear he could not tell. A thin, broken sound escaped the puppy's throat. Then another. Its chest rose, a little stronger this time. Caleb sagged back against the seat. A sound caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob tearing from his chest. His vision blurred. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window and closed his eyes for one brief second. Across the cab, the German Shepherd lifted her head with effort. A soft, broken whine escaped her, so quiet it was almost lost beneath the storm. Her gaze locked with Caleb's. "I see it," he whispered. "I see it too." The night wore on, Caleb's limbs numbed. His thoughts drifted and returned in fragments. The cabin on the edge of town, the empty chair at his table, the way silence had filled every corner of his life since the accident. He had learned how to survive alone. He had not learned how to live. The German Shepherd watched him through it all. Slowly, painfully, she shifted her head closer, her nose drawing in his scent. The puppy's scent. The shared warmth of their small, fragile space. Something ancient passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. They were all trapped. They were all fighting the same enemy. Outside, the storm howled, indifferent. Inside, warmth fought back. Dawn arrived quietly, without color or comfort, filtering through the frosted windows as a thin gray promise rather than relief. Caleb woke with his neck stiff and his hands numb, his breath fogging the air in shallow bursts. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then the weight against his chest shifted. The puppy lay tucked inside his sweater, small and warm now, its breathing steadier, its tiny body rising and falling with fragile determination. Relief loosened something in Caleb's chest that he had not realized was clenched. Across from him, the German Shepherd stirred. Her eyes opened fully for the first time since the night before. They were still sharp, but the fevered edge had dulled, replaced by exhaustion and pain, held behind stubborn restraint. The trapped leg remained swollen and dark, but the bleeding had slowed. They were still alive. Outside, the storm had weakened. The wind no longer screamed. It muttered. Caleb reached beneath the seat and pulled out the satellite phone he had kept since his training days, an old habit he had never shaken. The battery flickered, then held. He keyed in the emergency veterinary number he had memorized from too many lonely nights on patrol. The signal cut through thin and distorted. "Emergency veterinary services," a woman's voice answered, calm and steady, unmistakably used to crisis. "This is Dr. Evelyn Hart." Caleb closed his eyes. "Doctor," he said. "I need help." The voice on the other end of the satellite phone was steady, unhurried, as if storms, blood, and broken things were simply part of the landscape she lived in. "This is Dr. Evelyn Hart," the woman repeated. "Tell me exactly what you're seeing." Caleb drew a slow breath. His hands trembled as he spoke, the cold finally making itself known. Large German Shepherd female. Front leg crushed in a steel trap. Heavy blood loss. Severe exposure. Puppy about 2 to 3 weeks old. Hypothermic. We're stranded on the North Ridge Road outside Ravenfall. Cruiser's dead. Blizzard just started breaking. There was a pause. Not the dangerous kind. The working kind. "All right," Evelyn said. "You did the right thing calling. I'm mobilizing rescue now. Stay with them. Keep them warm. Do not attempt to remove the trap. Help is coming." Evelyn Hart was 52 years old, though few guessed it correctly. She was tall, spare, with iron gray hair usually pulled into a tight knot that never seemed to loosen, even after 20-hour shifts. Years in emergency medicine, first human, then veterinary, had carved calm into her bones. Her hazel eyes missed very little. People in the mountain towns called her when nothing else worked. She had buried her husband in an avalanche 12 years earlier and never left the mountains after. Some said she poured all the grief she never spoke of into the animals no one else would touch. Caleb ended the call and leaned back in his seat, staring at the pale sky beginning to filter through the snow clouds. The puppy stirred against his chest. The mother dog's eyes remained open, fixed on him, still guarded, but no longer burning with the same threat. Help was coming. It would take time. Nearly 3 hours passed. The wind weakened first, its roar dropping into a tired mutter. Snow continued to fall, but softer now, as though the mountain itself had finally spent its rage. Caleb kept moving the puppy against his chest, rubbing its tiny limbs, counting its breaths. The German shepherd's body trembled uncontrollably. Shock had wrapped its claws around her. Caleb spoke to both of them. Not full sentences, fragments. Old songs his mother used to hum. Promises he didn't know if he could keep. The mountain listened. The forest stood still. Then, far down the road, he saw it. A slow-moving shape cutting through the snow like a stubborn animal of its own. Yellow lights, wide treads. Rescue. The Park Service snowcat crawled into view, its orange paint dulled by ice and wind. The driver climbed down. Thomas Reed, late 30s, heavy-shouldered, beard permanently dusted with frost, former forest ranger who had transferred into rescue work after a logging accident claimed his brother's life. He moved with the careful humor of someone who had learned that fear didn't deserve too much space. "Well," Thomas said quietly as he approached the cruiser, eyes scanning the scene in a single sweep. "You look like hell." Caleb almost smiled. Together they transferred the German shepherd carefully into the snowcat's insulated rear compartment. She growled once when lifted, then settled, conserving what strength she had left. The puppy was placed in a heated carrier Thomas produced without comment. The ride back down the mountain was slow, silent. The world outside the windows still buried in white. At the Ravenfall Emergency Veterinary Clinic, Evelyn Hart was already waiting. She moved fast. Her hands were sure, her voice firm, but never cold. She assessed the dog's crushed leg, the puppy's breathing, then finally Caleb himself, her gaze lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "You look worse than they do," she said dryly. Caleb's mouth twitched. They rushed the mother dog into surgery. The doors closed. The red light above them glowed. Caleb sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped, his body finally shaking now that it no longer had to hold itself together. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and old wood. On the wall hung a faded photograph of Evelyn in her younger years, smiling beside a team of sled dogs, her eyes bright in a way time had softened but not erased. He waited. For the first time since leaving the life he once knew, he waited without orders to follow, without a mission to distract him. This waiting was personal. It hurt in ways he hadn't expected. When Evelyn finally emerged, her mask was pulled down, gray hair escaping its knot, face both stern and kind. "She's stable," Evelyn said. "Lost tissue, but we saved the leg. It'll take months of recovery. The puppy's fighting too." Caleb nodded, the words sinking in slowly. Later, he was allowed in. The German shepherd lay on a padded mat, leg wrapped in thick bandages, chest rising steadily. The fever had broken. Her eyes opened when he stepped closer. They were clearer now, still guarded, but no longer sharp with fear. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured. Evelyn watched from the doorway. "She'll need a quiet place. Someone patient." Her gaze rested on him. Caleb thought of his cabin at the edge of the forest. The silence. The long nights. "I've got space," he said. The puppy came next, bundled in a blanket, squirming weakly, eyes still sealed shut, nose twitching. Evelyn placed it carefully in his hands. Bottle-fed every few hours. Warmth. Consistency. Caleb looked down at the tiny life resting in his palms. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." Outside, the sun climbed higher, pale and cold, but steady. The storm was over. Spring did not arrive all at once in the high country outside Ravenfall. It crept in carefully, the way fragile things do, testing the edges of the snow before daring to stay. The mountains still carried winter in their bones, but the worst of the cold had loosened its grip. So had Caleb Monroe. His cabin sat on the edge of the forest where the trees thinned and the land began to slope toward the river. A modest one-room structure built by his father decades earlier, its weathered wood darkened by years of wind and snow. It had always been enough for one man, until it wasn't. The German shepherd lay on a thick blanket near the stone hearth, her injured leg bound in layers of white gauze, her breathing steady but shallow. She was alert even in rest, ears twitching at every sound, amber eyes tracking the room with careful suspicion. Caleb had named her Aria, a word that felt right in his mouth the first time he spoke it, as if her survival had always been a song the storm had failed to silence. Beside her, in a makeshift nest of towels and wool, lay the puppy. He had named the little one Solace, because that was exactly what the tiny life had become. Solace's body had already begun to fill out, his coat darkening from pale charcoal to the rich black and tan promise of his breed. His movements were clumsy, uncertain, paws too big for his body, his curiosity stronger than his coordination. He slept in bursts, ate in determined gulps, and followed every sound Caleb made as if the man were the center of the world. Arya did not follow, not yet. She watched. From the first day, her discipline was unmistakable. She responded to hand signals. She held eye contact. She waited for permission before shifting her weight. Whoever had trained her had done so carefully, deliberately, with patience and expectation. But damage lingered beneath the surface. Loud noises made her body drop low, ready to flee or fight. Sudden movement sent her heart racing. The world had taught her that safety could vanish without warning. Caleb understood that kind of lesson. Their days settled into rhythm. Caleb rose before sunrise, feeding Solace warm formula from the bottle Evelyn had given him, massaging the puppy's small belly the way the doctor had shown him. Arya observed from her blanket, silent and watchful, never interfering, never fully relaxing. When Solace cried, she shifted closer, her nose brushing him, her presence steady and protective. Caleb cleaned Arya's wound twice a day, careful, slow, speaking to her the entire time. Sometimes she growled softly when the pain flared. He did not retreat. He simply waited, letting her decide. Trust grew in inches. Nights were harder. The cabin was quiet in ways that pressed against the ribs. The wind moved through the trees like something alive. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Solace whimpered in his sleep, small paws twitching as if he were running somewhere only he could see. Arya rarely slept deeply. She startled at shadows. Once, a branch snapped outside and she lunged upright, teeth bared, her injured leg nearly buckling beneath her. Caleb moved slowly, palms open, voice calm. "It's just the trees," he murmured. "You're safe." The words were for both of them. Some nights, Caleb woke gasping, the echo of sirens and snow still trapped behind his eyes. He would sit on the edge of the bed until the room came back into focus, the shape of the cabin, the steady breathing of the two lives now tethered to his own. One evening, weeks into their quiet recovery, the sky flared with distant thunder. The sound rolled through the valley, deep and sudden. Arya panicked. She tried to rise, her body trembling violently, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Solace cried. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one tearing through her memory. Caleb knelt beside her, careful not to touch without invitation. "Hey," he whispered, "look at me." Her eyes locked onto his. They were wide, wild, drowning in something she could not leave behind. Caleb lowered himself fully to the floor, bringing his face level with hers. "It's over," he said softly. "You're here. You made it." He did not know if the words mattered, but he stayed. After a long moment, Arya's breathing slowed. Her body sagged. She leaned, just slightly, into the space he held for her. That night, she slept. Spring deepened. Solace learned to run. He chased snowflakes. He tumbled over his own feet. He barked at birds and shadows and once at his own reflection in the cabin's old mirror, retreating in offended confusion when it failed to respond properly. Arya began to venture outside again, limping at first, then stronger with each passing day. She followed Caleb when he chopped wood. She waited when he told her to wait. She lay at his feet when he sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun drop behind the mountains in slow, patient fire. The cabin changed. Where there had once been only the hum of wind and the creak of settling wood, there was now movement, breath, life. The house had learned how to breathe again. Evelyn visited once in her battered SUV, bringing fresh bandages and a bottle of antiseptic. She watched Caleb work with the dogs, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're good at this," she said. Caleb shrugged. "They're teaching me." Weeks turned into months. Arya healed slowly. Her leg would never be quite the same, but she adapted, strong and capable, a survivor in every sense of the word. Solace grew tall, his ears finally settling into their proper place, his coat thick and shining in the mountain light. Caleb felt something loosen inside him that he had carried for years. He was not just surviving, he was living. Summer arrived without ceremony. In the mountains outside Ravenfall, it did not announce itself with blazing heat or sudden color. It came quietly, the way grace often does, through softer mornings, longer light, and the slow retreat of snow from the high ridges. The river below Caleb Monroe's cabin ran free again, swollen with melted winter, carrying with it the memory of everything the cold had tried to keep. Caleb stood on the porch at dawn, a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching fog lift from the valley. He had not always loved mornings. For years after the accident, waking had felt like another obligation he had not asked for. But now he found himself waiting for the day to begin. At his feet lay Arya, her once shattered leg bearing weight again, her body stretched long and relaxed, eyes half closed in the early light. She was still watchful, still alert, but the sharp edge of survival had softened into something steadier. Beside her, Solace lay tangled in his own oversized limbs, tail thumping faintly even in sleep, dreaming of things he would chase the moment his eyes opened. Caleb smiled. The world had not changed much. The mountains were still ancient. The forest still held its secrets. Storms still came without warning. But something inside him had shifted, subtle and permanent. He was no longer alone. Later that morning, Caleb loaded the truck and drove down into town. He had not done that often since the winter. He had kept his world small, his cabin, the river, the forest, the dogs. But today felt different. Today felt like something that needed witnesses. Ravenfall's streets were busy with summer life. Shop doors stood open. Laughter drifted from the cafe on Main Street. Tourists stopped to photograph the mountains, unaware of how many stories the snow had buried only months before. Caleb parked near the clinic. Dr. Evelyn Hart was in her office when he arrived, her gray hair pulled into its usual tight knot, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when he knocked, a smile flickering across her face. "Well," she said, rising, "you look better." "So do they," Caleb replied. He opened the truck's rear door. Arya stepped out first, careful but strong, her gait steady, her eyes scanning the street with calm authority. Solace bounded after her, nearly tripping over his own paws, greeting the world with the fearless enthusiasm of a life that had never learned how close it had come to ending. Evelyn's breath caught. "You did good," she said quietly. "I had help." Evelyn knelt and examined Arya's leg, nodding in satisfaction. "She's going to be just fine." Arya met her gaze, then glanced back at Caleb, as if confirming something only the two of them understood. Later they sat together outside the cafe, the dogs resting in the shade, the town moving around them. "You ever think about what happens next?" Evelyn asked. Caleb considered the question. "I used to think the future was something you planned," he said. "Now I think it's something you show up for." Evelyn smiled. "That might be the wisest thing I've heard in years." The afternoon stretched on. By the time Caleb returned to the cabin, the sky was already softening toward evening. He sat on the porch steps, Arya at his side, Solace curled against her, watching the sun dip behind the peaks. The light caught in Arya's fur, turning the black to gold, the gold to fire. Caleb thought of the night he had found them. Two lives trapped in snow, the storm screaming around them, the world balanced on a single decision. Stay. That was all it had been. Not bravery. Not heroism. Just staying. He realized then that nothing truly extraordinary had happened. And yet, everything had changed. As darkness settled, Caleb lit the lantern and the cabin windows glowed warm against the encroaching night. The dogs followed him inside, their paws steady on the wooden floor, their presence filling the space that had once echoed with nothing but memory. Later, when the stars emerged, Caleb stepped outside again. The sky was clear now, the air cool and clean. He had not looked at the stars in a long time. For years, they had only reminded him of how small everything was. Tonight, they felt like witnesses. He knelt and rested his hands in Arya's thick fur. Solace pressed closer, his head against Caleb's knee, breathing slow and steady. "I didn't save you," Caleb murmured, his voice barely more than breath. "You saved me." The wind stirred the grass. The river whispered below. The miracle of it was not that 3 lives had survived a storm. The miracle was what had come after. Sometimes the world does not offer second chances with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it offers them wrapped in snow, disguised as responsibility, pain, and the quiet decision to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Caleb Monroe had once believed his life was something that had already happened to him. Now he knew better. It was something he was still living, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Sometimes God does not remove the storm from our life. Sometimes He places a soul in our path and asks what we will do with the love still in our hands. This story reminds us that miracles are not always loud. They often arrive quietly in the form of a choice. A choice to stay, a choice to care, a choice to believe that no life is forgotten. In our daily lives, we all face moments when it feels easier to turn away. But when we choose compassion over fear, God uses that moment to heal not only others but our own hearts as well. If this story touched your spirit, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue telling stories that lift the heart. May God bless you and protect you. May He bring warmth to your home, peace to your heart, and light to your path. If you believe that love, faith, and second chances still matter, please write Amen in the comments.